Hi, so welcome to this Facebook Live, and this is part of a series. It's all about the inner critic and shame, which is something that I've had a very intimate experience of in my life, and about how we can be free of that so we can be more naturally confident. So, this is part of a series, and if you haven't seen the previous ones, I'll put a link because it will probably make more sense what I'm about to say if you've seen the ones before. And today I am going to talk a little bit about the difference between guilt and shame, or between healthy shame and toxic shame. And in the previous, somebody asked a question about this, and in the previous lives, when I've been using the word shame and talking about toxic shame, about that debilitating pattern that is there within almost everyone that kind of holds them back from doing what they really want to do, as opposed to a healthy sense of conscience of when we do something, it may be like, well, that doesn't feel good. It's not something that I really want to be doing. And some people kind of call that guilt or healthy shame. So I really want to make a distinction here and talk a little bit about how to spot the difference. And I think it's really hard sometimes to spot what the difference is between those two. And I had an experience this week of a kind of mixture of the two. So it feels quite alive within me. And I hadn't communicated very well in this situation, and I was left with this yucky feeling within me. I mean, it was just like, oh God, that does not feel good. And I would say it was a combination of healthy conscience and a little bit of self-shaming and inner criticism that was happening within that. And one thing I would say as a useful barometer to like be able to make this distinction is what happens when you take action. So in this example, I made contact with the person who I hadn't communicated well with, and I basically owned what had happened and shared about it. And this kind of yucky feeling went away. So the kind of conscience, so kind of like, oh, great. So part of that acknowledging that is actually taking the action and stopping doing the things that we don't want to be doing, and also holding ourselves accountable for those. And there's the kind of relief that I feel on a bodily level when I act in that way. And as I went through this process of basically owning my mistake, I also noticed that potential for self-shaming, for toxic shaming to come in and judge me for the mistake that I had made. And I know that several years ago that would have been really strong, because that was a big pattern in me. And I would have beaten myself up for having made that mistake, and especially for having to go to the person and admit that I basically messed up. And it's really important to be able to make this discernment so that we can live in a way where we're actually in our integrity, but we're not going into beating ourselves up. And this process of beating ourselves up, it doesn't help. It doesn't actually help with keeping us aligned to our values. And this is really, it's really about self-parenting. And so I'm not suggesting that we throw out all personal boundaries. You know, we act like a parent who doesn't give their child any boundaries. I don't think that works particularly well. But at the same time, it's like we're not parenting ourselves in a way that when we make a mistake, we start to attack ourselves, make ourselves wrong, and beat ourselves up. So this, you might kind of sense that this fits with actually what we were doing in the last live, which was about like a cultivation of that benevolent parent who sees and discerns, and it's like acknowledging actually, well, this isn't, I don't want to act like this isn't okay for me, but for there to be the possibility of making a mistake, because we need mistakes in order to be able to learn. I mean, they've done research that proves that. So it's like we need to be able to allow ourselves to mess up and to be able to own it. That's actually what allows us to grow and move more into our integrity. And this process of self-shaming, of toxic shaming, actually stops that from happening. And even like it even makes it worse, because if there is a lot of self-shaming going on, if there's a particular thing that is being judged within us and not allowed, then it kind of gets repressed, and then it kind of pops out in a sort of rebel way. So it's kind of like this process of self-shaming actually makes it worse. It makes us act out, whereas the cultivation of a loving, benevolent parent, self-parent who can see, hey, yeah, like that really wasn't what you wanted to do, and yeah, that doesn't feel good, and it's really important that you own that and that you move towards how you want to be, but without that kind of really heavy-handed making yourself wrong. So I hope that distinction is useful, and I'm going to bring an inquiry at the end of this live, which is about, the inquiry is, how should I be? So this will help to kind of see the beliefs that are within us, the beliefs that are probably quite aligned with a healthy conscience, and then those beliefs that are kind of floating below the level of consciousness that are held by our inner critic, that have become somehow embedded within us. So it requires going under the surface to discover the shoulds that are there, and to include the ones that make conscious sense, like for example, there's a belief that I hold that I should respect someone's boundaries, that I should always try to be respectful of people's boundaries when I hear them. And that feels fairly aligned with kind of who I am. And there's like shoulds within me, like I should never be angry. That's somewhere within me. There's this kind of should, that there's that belief that's held there, and that, I mean, that doesn't make any sense. There's not anybody, well, I don't know of anybody who never feels anger, you know. It's like, so that's a unconscious should from my inner critic. That's more of a kind of a belief that's held within this process of toxic shaming. So the inquiry is, how should I be? And it also kind of brings awareness of the kind of expectation. Well, if you're anything like me, the level of expectation that the critic puts us under. And often they can be very contradictory. So it may be that there are shoulds that it's not possible to be both of them at the same time, or that our critic is holding shoulds about so many things in our life that we could never possibly achieve them. And often the shoulds, the shoulds that the critic holds, that this process of toxic shaming holds, are around things that we haven't done in our life. So I notice for me, there's a I should be a father that comes really strongly in that process of self-shaming, because it's something that I haven't done in my life. And for sure, if I was a farmer, I'm sure my critic would find something else to pick on. So yeah, how should I be is the inquiry that I want to leave. And just to kind of leave you with a sense of, yeah, when I talk about shame in these lives, I'm really referring to this process of toxic shaming, and not to discount this healthy conscience, which is actually really important. And can we hold ourselves in a way where we honor our values, but we also honor ourselves, so that we acknowledge our mistakes and allow ourselves to mess up and move towards what we really want to be. So I think that's enough for this evening, and there will be another one on Friday, the next step on Friday, and I think what I'm going to talk about is the kind of origins, like where this pattern comes from,